What's going on, everyone? Kevin from Epic Gardening here. We've got another epic, awesome guest. Today we have Chef Chris from Urban Farmer Restaurant, which is, I guess you could say, a true farm-to-table restaurant, and we'll get into what that means in Denver. And he's also the owner of Lost Creek Micro Farm, so a really great combo of a farmer chef. And I thought, who better to have on to help us really understand what a high-level professional is doing from a farm and cooking perspective, so maybe we can bring some of that knowledge down into our home gardens and our home kitchens. So first of all, Chef Chris, thanks for coming. And second, I think it'd be great to just give a quick overview of, the restaurant and the farm and kind of what you're doing there.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for having me, Kevin, and appreciate being here. The restaurant is Urban Farmer Denver in downtown. We are by Union Station at the Oxford Hotel on 16th and Wazee. And what we're doing is farm to table. Now, I know it's a term that people use a lot, but we're really looking from, the feed of our cattle, how they're treated and how they're put on the menu. For instance, in our on all of our steaks, it's from grass-fed, grain-fed, dry-aged, things like that. Whole animal butchery. So we have whole cows that come in probably quarterly and then month to month when we get busier in this summertime. Whole pigs and things like that we use throughout our programs, making our own sausages and bacon as well. But then even using, the beehives up top on the rooftop where I'm a beekeeper. And so using that to cut comb in the restaurant. And the reality is there's a lot of parts of the restaurant that show how your food gets to your table, how it's grown, whether it's aquaponic, hydroponic, out on arable land. So I think that's important for our guests to see, is how the food gets to their table and that appreciation for it. And then as far as Lost Creek Micro Farm, we've been around for about 2 years. My wife and I run it, and we grow directly for the restaurant, and we'll get into a little bit more, but being part of the farming experience, and then of course understanding how that seasonality translates to the restaurant and how we can use them on certain dishes so our guests can appreciate and understand where that comes from, has been an awesome experience just to translate it into the restaurant experience as well.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting to have someone like you on, because most people in this world are only in one of those two worlds. They're the farmer or they're the chef, and they're networking with the other half, right? But you're both. And so what I'm interested in, I know you have an event that you're actually growing for and cooking for coming up. I'm sort of interested in how that changes how you garden and farm, because you know what you're going to do with it, whereas most of us are growing and we know we're going to do something, but we don't have that rigid plan. You know what I mean?
Yes, well, that event you're talking about is August 15th this year at James Beard House in New York's Manhattan. And so we'll be cooking for 80 people. And a lot of the things that we do here at the restaurant, we translate the farm-to-table experience into cocktails as well as the entrees. And so I really thought, I really want to bring Colorado to New York in that respect, and I want to be able to grow the ingredients. And so from planning that, basically we pulled out seed catalogs in December, my wife and I, and it kind of looked at, well, what's going to be really interesting on the plate and what's going to be able to be transported well to New York as well. So, when you're looking at that, I was like looking at the seeds and then, okay, when can I get it in the greenhouse, and then timing, because I did pick out the time of August 15th. And then as we spoke about before we started, Denver had a freeze after Mother's Day, which is almost unheard of. So, right. Now that experience of not only farmer and chef is knowing, hey, as the farmer, this is a reality. These ingredients may not make it, and how are we changing that? So, part of that is writing the menu to be fairly general at this point in time, so that we're making sure that we can get to that point with the ingredients because of how weather affects us. So my wife and I sat down with catalogs and really looked at what we want to grow, what's going to be interesting. Some of those things were different colored watermelons, orange, yellow watermelons, and some of the heirloom varieties. I'm going to be part of Slow Foods later this month, Slow Food Nations, and some of their Arca-Taste items is it's a Cherokee purple tomato, and that's a kind of a heritage breed that's kind of we'll get lost if we're not growing it in seed saving. So I wanted to grow that as well. So as we look through these catalogs, seeds are kind of an important thing to me, and where they come from, and if they're open pollinated. I kind of go back down to my experience with It's called Culinary Breeding Network, actually. And what they do is they're the ones who are picking seeds for not only chefs, but also, the seeds that you get into in your garden stores or whatnot, depending on where they're from. And so when I learned a lot about how the seed selection process is for flavor through them, I thought, well, that's what I want to grow for. I want to go through for flavor, but also some of the esoteric things that a guest in the dining room or at this event in New York may have not seen before. And so one of them I'm really excited about this year is called an Itachi cucumber, which is a Japanese cucumber with a white skin.
Oh,
and so,
wow.
And so that's one of those things that, again, I've never seen it. I'm growing it for the first time. I wanted to showcase it there and know how it's going to taste. We have a ton of edible flowers that we can garnish all these things with. And then one of them is actually called the Brad's Atomic Tomato, which is...
Oh, I've grown that.
What's that? Okay, so yeah,
Yeah, it looks like sort of like an oil slick, I guess you could say.
Totally. And
yeah.
That's what, and so we're doing that same thing with the cucumber as an hors d'oeuvre, almost straight up. There's going to be some things we're doing with them, like cucumber tartare, and then with the Brad's Atomic, we're going to make our own kind of chili paste to go with uni, but make it an hors d'oeuvre, but make it about why that ingredient is so awesome. So kind of going back to your original question, that's how we plan for it, is like, I want to look at the pictures of these seeds, where are the seeds coming from, and why are they interesting not only to me, but how are they going to translate on the plate? And that's the main thing.
Yeah, it's so interesting because it's funny. I've grown the Brad's Atomic. I've grown the Cherokee Purple. Actually, we had Craig LaHoulier on the podcast, who is the person who actually named the Cherokee Purple tomato, which is really cool because he's definitely like the god of tomatoes. But it's so interesting that the considerations you have as a chef are quite different, but not dissimilar. Like I'm not necessarily thinking, how is my tomato going to look on the plate, or necessarily thinking, how can I combine these things to create nice visual appeal? Or maybe I'm not even trying to max out the genetic potential of like the flavor of the crop. Because as gardeners, sometimes I'm just thinking, I need this squash to get through the season without getting decimated by powdery mildew. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I'm actually looking at the Itachi cucumber right now, and it almost just looks like an albino cuke, which exactly. I can imagine would look really cool on the plate with the atomic grape. Is there anything else that you're doing that you think might be useful for a practical home gardener from your planning? Like, you have your set date in the future of August 15th. You know exactly it has to come together in some sense by then. So how does that inform the planning that you've been doing up until this point?
Well, we did a menu change, and so when we did our menu change, it's kind of like I did with my wife earlier on. I set it up with my chefs and said, "Hey, I brought all these seed catalogs in, and I said, let's look at this." And we go down our menu, and we know we're changing either a protein or the vegetable set for the season. And so, like I just mentioned, we had that freeze late, and normally after Mother's Day is the time where you're really going into true outdoor growing out here. And so, knowing that Lost Creek does that, we focus on our summer and our spring and summer change to be around that time so that I could start to layer in ingredients. And so I think knowing the timing of which those menu changes are happening in your certain area, as far as if you're growing for a chef, and also the amounts, sometimes I think the first year we did it, I didn't think I was going to have enough of something. And so I would kind of look at what the yields were and then succession plant from there, especially with lettuces. We had a hot, dry year last year. We kind of did everything all at once, and then they bolted on us. So we had a better idea of planting the succession because we knew we wanted to make it through the season. So when you're talking about the financial part of it, we knew that, hey, in the colder season, I can do faster, colder sensitive ingredients, and then move into the hot season knowing that I can do tomatoes and things like that. So I think even planning what are we going to have in the early season, since we don't have a hugely long growing season here in Colorado, helps with not only the financial part of the farm as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. And I'm just flashing back to some of the mistakes I've made in the past from a planning perspective. And a lot of it is either planning too much of the same thing in general because I didn't have a good handle on the true yield of that. So I just end up with way more radishes than I really care to eat, or
right. Yeah.
Or just getting them all at the same time, right? So you're kind of like not protecting the fact that maybe you will have a little bit of a hot streak and all the lettuce you decided to plant at the same time bolts, and you're like, okay, well, either I eat it all right now, and that's not a big saving crop either. It's like either I eat that all right now or I just kind of let it go, you know?
Agreed. And even part of that too is, those quick growing ones early season, I know that I'm going to have that space to plant more of my fall crops so that I'm getting usage out of that area, because again, Lost Creek is only a quarter acre. So,
Yep.
Maximizing that space is very important. So that my wife and I kind of talked through that. Hey, we're going to succession plant these lettuces. We're going to pull this out, and then we'll be able to use this, for fall, which we already have our seeds for fall. We've bought the whole catalog for the season, so we know exactly what we're going to layer in. And it might be a little 101 and not so much whether it's gardener or chef, but I mean, we write down everything on a graph. On a graphic of the farm. I have to see it because sometimes, I got to work a couple days in a row, and I'm working longer days. And, not that my wife can't call or text me, but it's easier for her to just get up and be able to leave off where I'm at. And so that planning, when in the winter, when you're just dying to garden and it's not so like in your face, I think is those pre-conversations really help.
Yeah. I would say I don't know anyone who can do it all unless you've got 50 years of experience under your belt, can just mentally calculate everything in their head. And whichever type of learner you are or however you have to see it, I definitely bust out like an Excel spreadsheet and just write things in. I do a couple math calculations. I have my plan of my garden in there. And so if I was growing for an event like yours and I really had to nail it, fortunately, I don't really have to because I can be a little looser with my garden, But I don't know. I mean, I'm doing this sort of survival challenge right now in June as of the date of this recording. And I effectively had to do that. I said, okay, June 1st is I need to start living off my garden. So I need to, this stuff needs to work at June 1st, So we talk a lot in our world as gardeners just about, sustainability, all these different concepts that tie into being a more sustainable person on the planet. But what does that mean in a restaurant context? And I think, Chris, correct me if I'm wrong here, we talk a lot in the restaurant world about where are you getting your stuff from? But maybe we don't talk enough about where does that stuff end up going, or how do you repurpose and reuse all the different inputs and outputs that a restaurant has to deal with. So I would love it maybe if we could maybe start with the farm and kind of take people all the way through how you're doing that and what you're calling 360-degree sustainability.
I mean, with the farm, basically, we're composting there. We recycle because that's kind of my household, if you will. It's definitely next to my house. And some of the things that we're doing with some of our partners is we work with a local brewer here called Intrepid Sojourner, and they give us their old grain that we feed to our chickens. So I pick up the spent grain and bring it over, and we feed it to our chickens so that, that's a full circle sustainability because they don't have a composting program there for that. So they give it to dairy farmers and us. So that's kind of like the quick, easy one with the farm because there's not a lot of output there as far as, plastics or anything like that. But Urban Farmer Denver is 3 meal a day. So a breakfast, lunch, and dinner 7 days a week, holidays, everything. We're open 365. So it's a pretty big beast in that respect. And, we have internal composting here at all of our outlets. We have a to-go program that's 100% compostable as well. So if you come here and you get something to go, you can take it home and you can compost it even in your backyard. And I actually did a test of it at Lost Creek, put it in my composting bin and went from there because I think there's a lot of differences that we can do here at the restaurant because a lot of things are commercially compostable and they're doing better about labeling all those things now. And I mentioned, cork before. We're recycling our cork through a company called Root Shift, who upcycles it to a company that makes sandals with it because cork doesn't actually biodegrade. A lot of people throw it in the compost because they know it's from a tree, but it doesn't biodegrade. And so we actually have to keep that out of the stream. We use a company here called RTI, which is basically a big tank of oil that we get in for our fryers. And not only do we filter it a number of times with a special process that they have, but our cardboard and plastic intake, those normally come in little 5-gallon pails that, can be recycled and composted. But if they don't exist in the first place, that's even better. So we have tanks on site that actually are piped to our fryers. And then once the oil is done, we can actually we send it back to them, they pick it up, and they actually recycle it into biofuels. So, it's going all the way out that way as well. The other part of it too is water conservation. So we're working in beta testing with a company called Boss Defrost, which is basically a recirculation valve for defrosting, which, in the restaurants, people may not know. You normally take a sink of water, and per health department, you have to have water running over it all the time. And so, generally you have a 4-pound block of shrimp, you'll throw water on there, and you might forget about it. Next thing you know, you've used so many gallons of water, when with the Boss Defrost, you can have it in there and recirc the same 5 gallons of water and make sure that.
Oh, I see.
See what I mean? So
yeah.
you're not just throwing, basically draining the Colorado River out here. And it's one of the parts of, I think, is kind of the skeleton in the closet of restaurants that people don't seem to understand. And so there is a lot of water usage. And so between the chemicals we use in our dish machines, being as efficient as possible, but also the water usage there. And so, water, oil, the to-go programs. We have compostable straws and compostable, serviceware that we use for those to-go programs. But also in the restaurant, unless you ask for a straw, you won't get one, because we're trying to keep them out of the landfills. But we have compostable one if you request it. And so, I think all three of those things make it the 360 thing, because of course, as we'll talk about a lot, is the sourcing of the restaurant. We have beehives on the rooftop, and those are all things that are very close and about the farm to table movement in that respect. But the rest of it is where I think people are asking. And so in order to be as sustainable and transparent, we put it on our website, and under our sourcing and sustainability page, we put our reports up from our waste company called Alpine about what our diversion rates are. And I'm happy to report that our last 2 months were 90%, which is trending to zero waste. And I'm really happy about that.
And I would imagine, and I don't know, but I would imagine the trends in a restaurant is well below 50%, right?
That's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I think, we've gotten better over the 2 years we've been open, and I don't know, but at least they don't tell us who the other partners are on the page. And I think I'll send you a link for, the notes so people can look at that. They show us kind of what our other partners are doing, and we are a good 40 to 50% above the other partners that aren't necessarily restaurants per se, but that are just doing as well as they can on composting and recycling, to the point where we actually went down to 4 days of trash, and it's 6 days of compost and recycling pickup.
Wow. Yeah, I pulled up the report while we're on the podcast here, and
cool.
It's really cool how they break this down, guys. So you can, of course, check it out at urbanfarmerdenver.com, but they'll break down, it's kind of like my power report that I'll get. It'll tell me how I'm doing compared to my average neighbors, and then even my efficient neighbors. And most months I beat my efficient neighbors, which is kind of cool. But yeah, it says when compared to other eating, drinking establishments, you're in the top 5 or 10%, which is really cool to see. Okay, so switching tacks a little bit, we talked about some of the things that I guess you could say are the other degrees of 360 degrees sustainability. What we think about a lot in restaurants, at least me as just someone who goes to them, is where's the stuff coming from? And I know that that's probably the over talked about topic, but it would be interesting to hear your thoughts on what you would call farm to table versus maybe a more pure farm to table from an input perspective.
Well, I think for us here, and a lot of the sourcing is on the page that you're looking at too, is the traceability of it. So, we work with a larger company called Seattle Seafood. We get all our seafood from them. And then what we've put on our menu for one of the fish we're getting from Iceland is a wolffish, and they give us a QR code that's on the bottom of our menu that when you come in, you can open your phone to your camera, and it'll link you to the fisherman who caught it, the journey it took to get here, all the way to Urban Farmer and your plate. And so I think when you start to see that stuff, and I'm happy to share that information, I'm happy this exists, because we're doing it on a daily basis, and I want more people to ask more questions and see what's out there. And so next to that is a QR code on our menu itself to the site that you're looking at, but also it's the relationship that we have with our ranchers. We work with a company called Boot Hill 7 up in Lusk, Wyoming, and we get whole animals from them. And honestly, we've been working with them for about a year and a half now. And we first started with them, they they were growing yearlings and that was it. And they've expanded to the point where they're coming down here in Denver and they're selling ranch to, your door essentially, steaks. And the cool part is Andrew and JD, or the owners out there, are the ones who really worked with certain companies like, can't remember the name of the guy, but basically they do a ultrasounding of the muscles before all the cattle go to finish, so that they can actually, as we're talking about planning, they can actually see what that animal might finish out to, a choice, prime, high 2/3, and decide if they want to continue the investment for another 90 days or 120 days when they're finishing the animal, to make sure that they're getting to the best marbling and USDA marks that they can. And so to me, that's a different level of food, farm to table, because I'm learning a ton. They're learning from us what we want as customers and what our guests see. And that story along with that. And I've visited the ranch a number of times and seen how they treat their animals, and talked to Andrew a lot about feeding. He's actually going down and picking up spent grain so that he can be more sustainable. And then we'll bounce, ideas off each other about better feed, or, more information. And so about the feed and how they're finishing. And so just knowing that is to me, I tell my staff about it, and we talk about it in pre-shift. And it kind of blows people away. Sometimes they think we're like making stuff up because they've never heard of these things. But it's a real thing. And I think unless we had that close-knit relationship with ranchers like that and farmers, we wouldn't know that information to share with our guests. So I think that's the difference.
Yeah. I mean, I'd never heard of the ultrasounding before, and I'm sure I'm sure like once you just dive into it full bore, you start discovering all these little optimizations and solutions that you would never have thought of before, just because you're networking with the rancher and he has info you don't have, but then you also have info he doesn't have as far as what you need from a restaurant perspective. Chris, I would love to know if, let's say, I've kept bees as an amateur before, or maybe I've taken a class or something like that, and I really got hooked, and I want to go down this journey. It would be cool to hear what the process is first, and then kind of how it's been for you.
Okay. Well, the process is Googling your state or county and looking up the Master Beekeeping Program. Most states have a certification process, and I've luckily been in Oregon and now Colorado that both have it. So that's the important part of the program. And, honestly, the way I got started into it was, I was at the Urban Farmer, which is the original one in Portland, Oregon. There's 16 floors there. I built a rooftop garden of 10 beds and wanted to put bees up there. And I wanted to do it just because I wanted bees and pollination and everything. And I thought, well, we'll have honey and I'll speak to the guests about it and I'll learn about it, and just kind of fell in love with it. And there was a company called Bee Local that was putting up hives, managing them. And the two owners, Damien and Ryan, basically started mentoring me. I'd be up there in the suit and they'd kind of, hey, you want to hold a frame? You want to see what we're talking about? And that was kind of the thing, was I wanted to go up there with them every week, and then just fell in love and wound up buying 4 hives. And then really, and people are probably laughing out there, but then realized how many holes I was missing in my beekeeping knowledge, right? And so Ryan was part of the program, and he was had finished the first program, and so he said, you got to do it. And so he introduced me to it. It was at Oregon State University up in Oregon, obviously, and it was $150. And they give you the breakdown. You have to have a mentor at every level. So there's the apprentice level, the journeyman level, and then the master beekeeping level. And I'm currently in the journeyman level. The apprentice level takes about a year to do. You need a mentor of someone of higher caliber in the program with you that signs off on your sheets when you go out and you do your hive inspections. And so there's, and it guides you on what you should be talking about. There's also some tests that you take. And then at the level I'm at right now is some research projects, community service, writing articles, and even starting some clubs. And so I started the Pollinator Bee Club at the CSU Extension here at the fairgrounds this year. And they have 4 hives out there. And the cool part is people here at the restaurant, I have 3 hives, as I mentioned earlier, but I can't always bring everybody to the rooftop. And I don't have a lot of jackets either. And so being able to go out to CSU Extension and help teach other people that want to get involved, they have a bunch of other jackets there. So it's been awesome to fill my knowledge with not only the book work, but also the community of beekeepers that are in there that are focused on wanting to know more and kind of test yourself on what your knowledge is. Because I always say beekeeping is a lot like religion. There's so many beliefs. There's not really a wrong way. There's very few black and white rules. So you kind of have to find the community-minded beekeepers that are like yourself or that you're interested in. And it's been a really awesome experience. I'm in my second level, as I said now, and really, I'm 5 years into beekeeping, I guess I should say. But the second part of it, I've been doing the master beekeeping for about 4 years now. And there's a lot of work ahead for me with the research projects. I've got a lot of the practical stuff done. I have a mentor out here who's a master entomologist at the Butterfly Pavilion, and that's been awesome because he's done other things like queen rearing and things like that I haven't even touched on yet. And so to me, that's what it's about, is testing yourself and testing your knowledge because you want to become better and want to know deeper about what the hobby is.
Yeah, yeah. And is there a length of time that is almost the minimum amount of time it would take to get through that program?
The apprentice level is a year. The journeyman level is about, if you take good detailed notes, you could probably get it done in a year. And then the master beekeeping level, I think, takes about 2 years. I'm actually not sure on all the certifications or tests they actually have you go through. So I think it's a total of about 4 years from start to finish. Yeah. I think at minimum if you're really grinding through it.
Got it. Okay, cool. And then once you become a master beekeeper, am I right in thinking that you sort of turn back down and you help an apprentice out or you help a journeyman out with their process?
100%. It's all about, about growing the community of beekeepers and even just knowledgeable people about beekeeping so that it continues to grow. And to me, mentoring new people coming in there, getting them excited about it is kind of been what it's all about, because I remember what it was like when I first got started. But also, some people that have been doing it for a while have so many kind of like, beekeeping hacks on how to do some cool stuff with bees that, you don't have to go out and buy everything out there. And so I've learned a lot in that respect as well.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. It's like the further down you get in any field, it seems like the less you have to rely on purchased products or like systems, and the more you can sort of think for yourself and be like, oh, if I just use this old piece of whatever, it'll do the job instead of buying some tool.
Agreed. And so, with all of this, the cool part is, we've been able to cut honeycomb in the restaurant for guests. And that's also another way that has been awesome to kind of spread the good word, if you will, of beekeeping, because so many people are interested in it. I've gotten so many emails and people interested in what we're doing and wanting to try honey. It's like, trying the honeycomb, because you don't see a ton of it around anymore. I mean, I know it's out there, but a lot of people don't find it unless it's the higher end gourmet stores. Mm-hmm. And so when we cut it in the restaurant, it's nice because it's like kid in a candy store. It's like, I remember when I was a kid having honeycomb, and it's so pure.
Yeah. That was going to be my final question, actually, was the applications or how are you working your beekeeping work actually into the restaurant? So is there anything else that you're doing with that honey, or there's some like signature dishes or desserts that you like to do?
Right now we have the honeycomb on one of our foie gras dishes that we work with. And so, again, we just cut it an ounce on that dish and it goes out that way. We use it for our cheese carts as well. And we have a composed cheese course that we use for after dinner or starting. So it's all on there. I pull pollen actually from the hive. And so we talked a little bit earlier about whole animal and things like that. But I kind of adopted a whole hive philosophy of pollen, honey. I make lip balms for the spa, the Oxford Spa next door, nice. That they sell over there. And then just, pulling pollen for cocktails, and then using the honey in cocktails as well. So we'll make syrups. And I actually make a bee pollen bitters called Waggle that is going to be coming out hopefully later this year. That is a bee pollen bitters.
Yeah, that sounds delish. I might have to come out when I'm done and try it out. Way long ago, if you're an old school podcast listener, we've done one episode on this before, but everyone has their own special cocktail, and certainly someone who's a chef and a farmer. I'm interested, Chris, in what is your approach, because you're doing cocktails at the restaurant and you're also sourcing a lot of that from the farm. So I'm curious,
Correct.
sort of, what are you actually growing and working into some cocktails?
I mean, an easy one is edible flowers. So we have bachelor buttons, calendula, sunflowers, and borage, which are easy to incorporate in cocktails, not only just as garnishes or muddled by being, in a tincture or a bitters, right? And so the flowers are pretty easy as far as that's concerned. Second level is, I'm growing an herb called salad burnet, which is, I hope the way you pronounce it. And it is basically this small leaf that tastes kind of like cucumber. And so you can muddle that in a drink as well. And I think it's kind of a hardy, green, herbaceous herb. And so we started growing it, and we're going to be using it in cocktails this summer. And so because I think it's important you can garnish with it, and people have never seen the leaf. So when it's in their drink, they are familiar with it because it's a cucumber flavor. But then it's a learning process of what it actually is when they ask what the garnish is on the drink. And so you can use it both ways that way. And then I think, the last part would be even tomatoes and peppers and things like that. So we're growing a habanada pepper this year, which is a habanero with no spice. That's from a company called Row 7 Seeds out of New York. And I'm excited about that application. We grew that specifically this year to maybe make a beer or a tincture and or like a simple syrup, because not having that spice in the cocktail makes the ability to change the cocktail one way or the other. And that's the main ingredient. You can pickle it, it has great color. And so those are kind of the things that I'm looking at when I'm growing for something like that is, what's the garnish going to be like? What's the color going to be like? And what's the flavor profile? Is it something that's so esoteric that unless that there's a few small percentage of people like that are listening to this podcast that are like, that sounds interesting because I want to grow that, or I've heard of that want to try it. And that's the other part of this, is making it applicable for most people that come in the restaurant to want to try their hand at.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess because you could go to the other extreme and just grow the most random esoteric things, and maybe the demand for that cocktail wouldn't be that high just because it's so out there.
Agreed. And there's the one that I think is fairly out there, which this is kind of a little thing. If you come into Urban Farmer, it's called the Urban Forager. It's not on the menu. It's on what we call our hidden menu. And it's a drink that I actually made when I had my chef tasting for becoming the executive chef here. I was foraging a lot in Portland, Oregon, which is where I was at the original location before we came to Denver. And we took matsutake mushrooms and we soaked them in a white whiskey. And so matsutake mushrooms are known as the pine mushroom, and we soaked it in a white whiskey from a Winter Park company called Idlewild, and let it sit for about 15 days. Because this is kind of the other part of the conversation, is finding that many mushrooms is great. I could get a pound of them and they're really intense, but I couldn't share it with everybody that came in the restaurant. So I thought, well, how can I do this for more than one person? So even if you have a small garden, when you make tinctures or you're batching cocktails and you only have a couple cucumbers, you can share that with a lot of people. And that was the part that I really wanted to do, was share it with as many people as we could. And so by having these matsutakis, we only had a pound of them. We made about 6 quarts of the alcohol. And then we made the cocktail, which has the rooftop honey, bee pollen, the flowers I just mentioned. Strega is a botanical kind of liqueur. The bee pollen bitters, the waggle that we mentioned as well, and then shaken all together with that whiskey, and a little bit of lemon in there as well. And again, it's called the Urban Forager, which is foraging mushrooms, and of course the bees foraging urban for nectar. And it is one of those esoteric drinks, but everyone I've given it to, before I tell them what the ingredients are, they're blown away by it, because I mentioned mushroom and cocktail, which does not sound amazing to anybody on the planet. I realize that. But when you speak about what the specific mushroom is and how the application is, people love the cocktail.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I would imagine no one would ever have guessed, no one on the planet Earth besides the creator, you, would ever guess that ingredient profile, basically.
Agreed. And that's what I think is going from something as approachable like salad burnet with, cucumber flavor that people know. And then, of course, all the way down the gamut of a matsutake mushroom, which is that kind of pine flavor.
Yeah, yeah, and I think just for a home gardener, I think what's cool is, like you're saying with the matsutakis, if you have a pound of them, that's how many people can you realistically share that with if you serve them in a mushroom format, but instead you sort of extracted some of the flavor profile out of it into the white whiskey, right?
Correct.
And then you can distribute that across however many cocktails, right? So then everyone can get a little taste.
Agreed. And that's when you're talking about growing, whether you're small in your backyard and you only have a couple, boxes or even like a quarter acre, you can use those ingredients and have a dinner party and share it with everybody, no matter how many people are coming over, which I think is the cool part.
Yeah, I think that's cool. So maybe if you guys are at home and you don't have a lot of space, like of course you guys know I don't have a lot of space myself. Sometimes I'll grow one plant and then I'm experimenting at least now with trying to extend that by, making a tincture or whatever and trying to really stretch it out a little bit. So I'm actually really curious because I don't make a lot of dessert for myself, Chris.
Yeah.
So I'm curious sort of how you're thinking about that from a gardening perspective.
It's always a little bit easier when you're doing like basil or something like that. I think is a great application into like say an ice cream or something like that. And one of the things that we do is we make a baked Alaska. And so when you can make it any ice cream flavor. I mean, I've had strawberries and raspberries and things like that as well, kind of going back to our conversation of you don't need very much to make a lot of something like that. And so we had a strawberry baked Alaska. So we took the strawberries, put them in, made an ice cream, wrapped them in meringue. And then when we burn them tableside, because that's what we're known here at Urban Farmer for, we would garnish with edible flowers on top of that and some of the local honey. So kind of put all those farm components together onto one plate. We have a chocolate dessert that we have on the menu now that it's coconut, and it's kind of like a German chocolate cake, right? And so the garnishes on that, or it could be micro basil because that goes well with chocolate, as well as some of those edible flowers, but it can be basil flowers. They can, and they help brighten up the way that the chocolate sits on the plate because it's so black and white, but it's so good in that respect, right? And then from there, it's kind of just infusing into, even just some cheese plates that we do. We use some of our peppers to make pepper jams on a cheese plate, or for a cocktail, we use the pepper jam in there. So it has multiple applications, but dessert also here is a cheese plate. And so it doesn't always have to be sweet in that respect. And so when we've made like these pepper jams from some of the peppers that we have, I made ghost chili. I had ghost chili pepper jam. And again, that's a savory element, but you can make it sweet because ghost peppers is one of those things that I love growing them because they're beautiful, but they are potent. And I make hot sauce with most of them. But me and my wife were kind of like, what are we going to do with the rest of these? So we made a batch of chili jam. And then, of course, fat is what knocks down spice. And so when we would put it with ice creams and cheese plates is when that spice was kind of muted and actually palatable for most of the guests that came in. And so that's kind of the ways that we've done it. I think infusing into ice creams and cookies and things like that, even putting edible flowers into baking cookies is kind of the best ways to do it to grow specifically. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does. And I know we talked a little bit about edible flowers yesterday in the cocktails episode, but I'm curious if what you're working into desserts for edible flowers is different than cocktails, or do you kind of just grow a classic, borage flowers, the bachelor buttons, things like that, or is there anything specific to a dessert that you think works really well?
The calendula and the dandelion, not dandelions, the calendula and marigolds, because marigolds have that perfumey flavor which comes across in desserts, I think, well. Lavender is that same way. Lavender also fits well in that category.
Yeah, like a lavender ice cream is one of my personal favorites.
Yes.
Cool. So, all right, awesome. Growing for dessert, guys. Certain things to try. I think once my survival challenge is over and I can actually eat desserts again, I'm going to be trying to make some more ice creams and things like that. I've just been getting really into what to do with produce besides just simply, cooking it on a plate. What can I do that's like, I guess you could say, more true cooking? I know this is probably the most basic question of all time, Chris, but could we maybe first start by saying what actually is like the culinary definition of a garnish?
That's a great question. To me, it's something obviously that you're adding to add value to the actual plate. And that could be a puree, it can be raw, it can be a gel, it can be a many things. But I think generally they're tiny features that help bring the whole plate forward that, without it wouldn't be as amazing.
And is it, because I guess as a kid, my idea of a garnish was just parsley on a plate at a diner, like something like that.
Yeah.
And you would never eat that, or at least I would never eat that. Is a garnish from a chef's perspective always meant to be consumed, or is it sometimes meant to be consumed and sometimes meant to be just kind of looked at and to beautify the plate?
From my perspective, it should always be something that's consumed.
Okay, got it. Okay, cool. So then that leads us into what kind of things are you growing at Lost Hill that you then are working onto a plate to beautify and also be consumed?
It's Lost Creek, and that's where.
Sorry.
That's all right. That's all right. Lost Creek is, right now we're growing these purple snap peas, and sometimes with purple produce, once you blanch it or cook it, the purple goes away. So we keep it raw, and it's something that we use to garnish our cauliflower steak. So we have a cauliflower steak on the menu, which is our vegan option here at a steakhouse. Yes, we do both. And so we garnish that on top of the plate with like pea shoots and pea flowers as well. And so those are all things that, again, when you have a pea flower, it's pink, and then the purple of that purple snap pea, it pops, so you only need a couple on there, and you have that crunch raw texture amongst cooked items. And I think it kind of has its biggest bang for the buck, and especially, everyone always says you eat with your eye first, and that's where that comes in. We're growing a Ready Freddy basil, which is a deep red basil, which you can garnish on our tomato salads, which helps. Most people have never seen a red basil, and so they've seen green, and they always think red's going to taste different. But a Ready Freddy is a version of a green Genovese, and so that gives pop to it as well. And so throughout the season, we have smaller leaves, and so we'll do smaller garnishes of leaves on there to keep that red flavor. I think another one on that same cauliflower steak we were talking about, I'm growing Row 7's Badger Flame Golden Beet. And I think the oblong and the color, so we're shaving that raw over the top because most people have never seen that oblong beet, but also with those beautiful orange, colors, it's beautiful to the eye. And I think the last one is that I'm really excited about is oyster leaf, something that I tried when I was in Europe last year, and it grows on the banks in Scotland. And it's a leaf that's the texture of like kale. So it has that lighter green, and it literally tastes like oysters. And so when you put that on a garnish for an amuse or an entree for a fish plate, and you have that variation of that flavor of oyster, it blows people away. Just like you said, I had never had it. I've been cooking for 25 years. I'd never come across it. And then I wound up getting it from Baker Creek because they're the ones who had it. I said, I got to find what this is.
Yeah. Wow.
And it's called oyster leaf.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now, and just I would encourage you guys to actually look up some of the ones we've talked about. The Red Freddy is a really cool looking one. It literally just looks like a pigmented Genovese basil, right?
Yeah.
And the Badger Flame beet, almost when you chop it in half, almost kind of has like a sweet potato appearance to it.
Correct.
It's like a bit of a patterned sweet potato. And then you said you shaved that one really thin, so it kind of becomes a little translucent almost.
Yep.
Yeah, that looks really cool. And then oyster leaf. Would you?
And I think
sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was gonna say the last one that I know I'm excited about all this because it gets me excited. But the last one is, we do a tableside Caesar here, and I thought, well, sometimes Caesar's boring. Like, even though you can make it great, and I feel like we do, but how can we make it better? And so we're doing a tableside version. I'm getting a Truchas. I think it's Truchas red romaine. It's this dark red romaine that still has the crunch of a green romaine. We're going to cut that table side, and then we're using the eggs from my farm as well to make the Caesar dressing table side. And then most people have never seen, speckled eggs or blue eggs or green eggs, things like that. So when you see this cart roll out and you have these beautiful eggs, this deep red romaine, to me, that is the connection to say, hey, we grew these because you've probably never seen it before. One. Yeah. Two, it's going to taste amazing because it's so close. I mean, we're only 5 miles from the restaurant. And then three, another pop of, you've never even seen eggs like this. Why do I have Easter eggs on the cart? What's going on? And so that's another way to garnish the same stuff that you're used to eating, just make it a little bit more beautiful or a little bit more interesting to the guest.
Yeah, I mean, I really like that idea, and I would imagine from a Caesar salad perspective, it's just a drastically more interesting version of a classic dish, right?
Agreed, 100%.
Cool. Awesome. Some great recommendations, guys. I'm going to make sure and add those varieties to the podcast description because I am going to lose my budget for next year, and I do it every year anyways. I kind of go through my favorite seed companies, Baker Creek, of course, being one, and I just add to cart everything, and then I go in and I look at what the total is, and then I say, okay, I need to delete, $50 worth or whatever it is. I kind of want to flip the script a little bit and talk about what happens when you just don't really know what to do with either a bumper crop that you end up getting, or maybe you have some sort of mistake, or you just didn't get as much as you wanted. I'm curious, Chris, if there's things that you've run into because you're both a farmer and a chef that have made you kind of stretch your creativity, like, oh, I have way too much squash, or I have, some crop didn't quite turn out the way I wanted. Do you have any sort of stories like that?
Absolutely. I think that, I think the biggest joke what a farmer told me once is that if you don't have somebody coming to your house and trying to give you zucchini or squash during the summer, you don't have any friends, right? So basically, when you're doing that, I have a good recipe she gave me a good recipe rather to make a relish, like instead of a pickle like cucumber relish, it was a zucchini relish that you could use on like your hot dogs and things like that, because I think that's the part that, the pickling part, or like we talked about cocktails a lot, was making a syrup. If you have like a ton of basil and you need to make a syrup with it because you're just not going to eat a bunch of basil or tomato salads, and executing it that way. I think we made the escabeche, I believe it's called, the hot Mexican pickled carrots last year, because I had enough peppers, but they were kind of all over the board, the petroleum peppers and things like that. And then we had a ton of carrots, which I have two young kids. They both picked a lot of them all at their adolescent stage. And so these ones got very big. And so we wound up cutting them up and pickling them. And then we love eating it when we're making like Mexican food and stuff. So right. I think pickling and batching out simple syrups. But I think, the other thing was a funny story was I had a bunch of cross-pollinated melons and squash from the previous year, honestly, because my wife and they were coming up and we thought, well, we don't want to pull them because we want to make sure we have something growing, because we weren't sure about the season, and we're new farmers and we wanted to make sure we had something. And as they came out, I realized they were cross-pollinated from the previous year. And so instead of just being like, I don't know what these are, I took one and peeled it down and tasted it. Me and my wife tasted it. I thought, well, what can I do with that? And they were a cross between pumpkin and curry squash and summer squash and spaghetti squash. And so they were getting hard really quickly. So I brought them to the restaurant, I peeled them down, and they were hard, kind of like a potato. Tossed them in blackening spice and seared them really hard on a flat top, and then served them with like an edible flour butter. And then even the blossoms I tempora'd and put them on top as a garnish. And so I was using the whole plant in that respect to I mean, for lack of a better term, to get rid of these things, but it wound up being a special the whole season.
Wow.
And you know what? We cooked it at home. Me and my wife grilled it at home as a side and tossed it with olive oil, salt, and pepper. And it was kind of like, I feel like when you were talking about your garden challenge, I feel like that was kind of what we were doing, and inadvertently was saying, hey, we grew it, we're putting our effort into it, and we're going to eat it, and we're going to figure out some creative ways to eat it. And we grilled it, we sauteed it, and like I said, we blackened it, using spices. And so that was just one ingredient that we pushed to so many different levels to make sure that we enjoyed it for the season.
Yeah, that's really cool, and it's the same logic I've applied to my potato life that I'm living right now. I have 70. I started the month with 70 pounds. I've traded some off, of course, and I have 3 different varieties, but I've learned how to make like the diner style hash browns, or like salt and vinegar potato, just all these different things. And potatoes, of course, probably is one of the better crops to do that with because they're just so versatile. But I do have a question for you then, because in a trade I just got, I can't even tell you, I have some of the biggest zucchinis and squash that I've ever seen, and I have maybe 20 pounds, like just so much. And so could we dive in really quickly to that zucchini I think, relish that you said you made.
Yes, I made it last season, so I'm gonna have to. I don't have it on top of my head, but let me see if I can find it. But basically, it's similar to a pickle relish. So you can basically take that, but you have a lot more water than you're in those zucchinis than you're gonna have for cucumbers. You cut them down really small, and then you mix them in your garlic and your onions, and then kind of go from there. And you can Google a kind of a dill pickle relish recipe, and kind of follow it along, but insert your zucchini. So it was again, I don't have the top of my head. I apologize for that. And maybe we can add it to the notes. But it was that simple because it was the same type of thing. You have all the zucchini, but it was a way of preserving it in the moment and then using it later on an application that you love, especially summertime.
Yeah, I'm going to have to, I just don't have another choice unless I want to sit there and just eat pounds of zucchini until the end of the month, which, you know what, I might also have to do that. But anyways, man, it's been really fun having you on the show, and I would love to give you the chance to kind of talk a little bit. I know we've talked about your restaurant and your farm quite a bit, but where can people reach you? How can they reach you? Is there anything that you've got coming up that you'd like people to know about?
Absolutely. My name is Chris Starkus. That's Starkus. I'm the executive chef at Urban Farmer Denver, and that's, we're on Instagram, Twitter, at Urban Farmer Denver. And then I'm at Chris Starkus on Instagram and Twitter, so you can follow me there. And then, of course, Lost Creek Microfarm, and we are at Lost Creek Microfarm on Instagram and Twitter. I do a lot of updates that way. And you know what? We have the James Beard coming up August 15th. I'm really excited that July 19th, we're doing Slow Food Nations here in Denver, doing a couple events there, a lot of farm to table stuff. But mainly come by the restaurant and come and see me. If you come and you're in Denver, ask for me. I'd love to come out and meet you guys.
Today, we are joined by Chris Starkus. He is an executive chef, or he was an executive chef at Urban Farmer Denver before he made a career pivot and became an eco-entrepreneur. He's the partner and the chief sales officer of a company called Boss Defrost. And actually, that's something we're going to talk about in today's show. I remember, Chris, a long time ago when you were on the podcast, the first round, you were mentioning some of the ways that Urban Farmer Denver was working to become more sustainable, and Boss Defrost, or at least the early seed of Boss Defrost, was briefly mentioned. And so I thought maybe we could start out with a refresher on why is so much water wasted in professional kitchens?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of water waste streams that happen there, but there's constantly certain things that you're trying to do, whether you're changing the nozzle to a sprayer or aerators in your hand washing, in your bathrooms and your hand washing sinks. And they do a little bit, but, when we're talking about the sprayer, sometimes the low flow doesn't work well for the person working it, and all of a sudden that nozzle is missing and you need a new one because they'll take it off, and because it's not making their life more efficient. And so one of the major waste streams that we want to illuminate is basically the cold water running method that's used to thaw food in kitchens. And essentially there's a number of ways to thaw food, and the promising no water use way is to put it in your walk-in and let it thaw out, or your refrigerator at home. And that normally takes, depending on the size of it, 4 to 5 days. Now, whether you're ahead that much at your house or, that doesn't necessarily translate into a kitchen, and you get behind and you need to thaw something out quickly. And you do that by basically turning on the faucet in your sink, putting that food into that sink, and then turning the water on and letting it run over that piece of food or that, meat, whatever it is, until it's thawed. And that can take up to a number of hours and, of course, a number of gallons. From the USDA website, it takes about roughly 125 gallons of water per pound of food to thaw in this method. And so, I mentioned earlier, in our earlier conversation, was that we were beta testing Boss Defrost at the time. I actually beta tested it for a year. And what Boss Defrost is it's an innovative new kitchen appliance that mimics this USDA running water method for thawing food, but it uses 98.5% less water. It's NSF certified, which is the National Science Foundation certification, which is about sanitation and protecting food quality. And it's also, it's portable and affordable. And the main thing is it's a now solution not only for professional kitchens but for residential kitchens. And so we were employing it at the restaurant. And the great part about it is, as I mentioned before, you normally have to use this sink, and the kitchens are notoriously smaller than they need to be, and that's some precious real estate. So this gives you the ability, Boss Defrost gives you the ability to kind of free your sink up and use it in a 600 hotel pan or a different container so that you can recirculate the same amount of water. And so, for instance, if I am thawing 5 pounds of ground beef, which I did often at Urban Farmer, was essentially thawing it faster because Boss Defrost's flow is about 1,000 liters an hour. And I'm doing it consistently over that food to thaw it faster, and using about, I would say it's about 3 to 5 gallons of water for that 5 pounds versus what I just mentioned, which is 1 pound for every 125 gallons. So I just changed. Yeah. And
that's
so
insane.
Agreed.
And it's potable water that you're wasting too, right?
Correct. It's 100% potable water. And so that's the other part, is that this is the solution for it. There is no other option that's on the table. And so that's the other part, is it hasn't been addressed. And as I'm talking to my chefs and colleagues and even people at home, they're basically like, wow, yeah, I worked in a restaurant, or I still do. And everyone has seen the water running, but that's just what is recommended and what is needed. And so this, is definitely is put into place to save all that water waste. And I saw it firsthand at Urban Farmer, like I said, for over that year to really want to commit that I have becoming a partner of Boss Defrost and really bringing and illuminating this water waste issue in kitchens, both professional and residential, to light,
Yeah. I mean, I know that, of course, we're talking about a gardening podcast here, but I'm always interested in ways that we can reduce. And clearly, if you're cooking a lot at home too, I can see at some inflection point, a home cook is probably going to want this. You know what I mean? If you're preserving your own food, which we're talking about in a later episode, any sort of defrosting, especially as water rates, at least here, are rising in San Diego. I mean, we're taking our water from the Colorado River, a lot of it at least.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I mean, it kind of goes to some of the topics we've talked about in this week of episodes with you, with the dry farming and the water security and just different ways to repurpose. I love when a solution like this comes along. I'm trying to think of one in gardening that was so obvious. I mean, I guess maybe whoever invented or came up with, drip irrigation or something like that, where it's just not dumping water directly on top of your soil and then immediately evaporating off 67% of it or whatever the percentage is. So, Correct. Yeah, I mean, I think it's really cool. So what's next on the menu for Boss Defrost?
Basically, like I was saying, we're going to go on a road trip this summer and basically go to all these water stricken areas, a meeting with culinary schools. We're talking to, companies like Kroger and Hilton International, and going, when you start to think about all the commercial kitchens that are out there, hospitals, schools, it gets very, very big. And all these kitchens are doing this thawing method. And so that's what's next, is really casting that net of letting people know that we are out there. We have a solution to this water waste problem, and that we can really, really save tons of water. And that's also what's next, is us quantifying it through a lot of third parties here. But we are for sale now. We started sales this year, reach out if you're interested. I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. And of course, good luck with the launch of it all. It looks really cool. And I would love to, whenever you do the road trip, definitely stop by San Diego.
We will definitely come and see you.
It kind of gets to a topic, Chris, that I know that you did a lot of last year, and that would be just general thoughts and thesis around water and the way that we use that vital resource, as well as how that can lead into a style of farming known as dry farming. So I thought maybe we could start off with the water security stuff.
Sure, absolutely. I think coming from the restaurant background, it was something that was in my face in terms of, I'm in Denver, Colorado, as you stated before. And, when you're talking about just water waste happening, you think about and you're imagining how many gallons of water are wasted not only in our residential houses, but in restaurants and things like that. And so I think about what can be conserved. How can we get better at this? How can we as humans change our habits? And so, recently just went to the Denver Sustainability Summit out here, which was December 5th. And essentially the interesting part was the goal for Denver in 2020 is to reduce the per capita use of potable water by 22%. So that's 165 gallons a day per person. And so, we'll talk about Boss Defrost doing some of that here in Denver. But as we talked about as a farmer, utilizing your irrigation and conserving these precious resources. Because when I think about Colorado, I've been in Colorado for 3 years, going on 4 years now. And so when it was explained to me, because I never thought of it, but there's no rivers running into Colorado. All the rivers run out of Colorado. And most people know of the Colorado River. And that hits New Mexico, Nevada, Arizona, California, and Utah. So when we're talking about this conservation, yes, I'm sitting here in Denver and one city, one state, but it flows literally and figuratively into so many other areas. And I think when you think about that as a farmer, urban urban gardener, no matter how small or large, that's a big deal. And so when you're focusing on how you can value water that way. Last year when we were talking about dry farming a little bit earlier, Kevin, was, we had an annex that we were growing on, which was a friend's property here. Lost Creek Micro Farm is run off a well, and then the annex actually is run off what's called ditch water. And a ditch water is basically irrigated water above ground during the season, and then they shut it off. And so when we were talking to our friend that had the property, he's like, oh yeah, they normally shut it off in like August, September, but we've never had an issue. And this past year in 2019, we put a bunch of cantaloupe out there because I wanted the plants to be able to have a little bit of room to grow. There was a little bit of shade there to help them out. And, so come I think it was July, the ditch water was shut off because it was such a dry year the previous year. And the aquifers weren't as full. And so you're talking to a guy who's lived in Denver since the 40s, and this is the first time he's seen it shut off so early in the season. He was blown away. He couldn't believe it. And so we wound up dry farming off of necessity. And what we did was basically, dry farming is letting Mother Nature essentially water your crop when it comes. And so luckily we had a lot of rains that previous year or that year. And I had actually, my wife and I kind of talked to one another, how are we going to do this? We let the weeds kind of come up. We wanted to make sure that we didn't have any bare ground so that the dew in the morning would stay in the soil. Mm-hmm. And then I had a trip planned to Europe. We went to Europe and there wasn't much we could do. So we came back and we came back. I had assumed that we would get nothing. Like I had already thought we were going to have loss and that something was going to take over and eat it up or whatever. We got back and I wound up getting close to 200 pounds of cantaloupe. Now, granted, they all ripened at the same time because I wasn't picking them throughout. But I wound up making sorbets and we were making cocktails with it. We wound up making beer with it with a local brewery here. But I was happy to get something because we all know as gardeners and farmers, once you're putting the effort into it, you want to make sure you have a consistent you want something for your effort, right?
Oh yeah, definitely.
And so that was a big deal was really that test in the dry farming. And with my beekeeping class here, I partner with the Jeffco Master Gardeners, and they have a local garden out there that they do dry farming with. So any of those plants like you were talking about that are regionally specific that do well just off the climate and the rainfall there with little or to no irrigation extra happening there. And so that's kind of where everything converged. And, I just wanted to bring it up as a topic to have people think about that, because you mentioned that before as well, that you were going toward growing something, instead of like piloting something new that you haven't grown, but maybe going to more tried and true things that maybe grow best in your area and or your microclimate. Some people have more shaded or more sunny areas that have crops that do well. So in that conservation piece, I would just say, sometimes you can partner with your neighbors and say, hey, you know what? Mine, I can tell you right now, my neighbor across the street, he's literally across the street, for some reason, he can grow way better hot chilies than I can. I've tried for 2 years now, and he just does a better job every year. And it's hard not to be competitive about it. But I think this past year I was like, okay, fine, let's barter and let's trade. And that's what we did. So that's kind of where, I'm going with that piece.
Yeah. I mean, it makes total sense. And I think just to speak on the varieties, I know for me, again, it's hard to resist the new varieties, but at the same time, I have a friend, Bridget, at San Diego Seed Company, who's specifically growing, let's say, a brassica that's more adapted to a 10B style climate, which is much warmer and really doesn't quite get cold enough sometimes to make a nice, beautiful crown on the broccoli. And so it is, in a way, sometimes foolish to grow a new variety that is, maybe it's too water hungry, right? Like speaking to the topic that we're just talking about, or maybe it just simply looks cool and won't perform well. And then, it's just not a good, again, to go back to the usage of resources. It's not a good use of resources to grow something that will have a low probability of success just because it's cool, right?
Right. Yeah, so, I totally agree. And it's hard to do. I know. And again, we're all speaking from past experience, because there's that thing you see, in those seed catalogs that's kind of on the edge of your growing zone. And maybe you're just like, I think I can do it. I can cover it, or I can extend my season in the greenhouse, because you really want to. So I get it. I mean, I've done it myself. So I totally understand.
Yeah, exactly. Well, cool. I mean, I think that's fantastic. I think the topic of dry farming, everyone, is something that I would recommend doing a little further research on. It's actually really interesting. And I know I actually met someone who ran a wine like aggregation sort of company where they picked from vineyards that only did dry viticulture, which was pretty interesting. I thought kind of zoom out a little bit and talk about some of the larger topics that can trickle down and affect us in the garden or in the farm. The topic is the boom and growth of urban populations and how that affects the way that we source and produce food.
Mm-hmm. Yes, absolutely. I think that there's a couple of things there. When I was in Portland, Oregon, I was urban farming on a rooftop, 16 stories up. We had 10 beds and 6 hives up there. And it was interesting just to kind of see what you could grow in 10 inches of soil. And so that was the original thought. And then, of course, as I've gone deeper in this, and then gone now here to Denver with a completely different climate, and then going to arable soil next to the house for Lost Creek Micro Farm, the biggest part about it for me was just basically that there's so many ways to grow, and that, we had aeroponic, we had hydroponic, we had aquaponic on property in Portland, Oregon as well. And then here in Denver, with obviously the cannabis industry, there's a lot of warehousing, a lot of energy, and there's a lot of people attacking it from that way. I recently just went to that sustainability summit, and there was an interesting thing there called agrivoltaics, which was essentially solar panels above your field, because we have a lot of as you go to the east side of Colorado, it gets more plainsy. You don't have as many of the mountains and things like that. And essentially they were putting solar panels above the growing area to not only have shade, but also to divert water to where you wanted it. And essentially they called it using the sun twice, harvesting the sun twice, which, I went to that summit and found it very interesting. There's a million questions on, how the longevity and things like that. But I think just looking outside the box of what your normal growing is, because we may not have the ability to grow in urban areas and outwards with the way the property growth is. And I know that here in Denver, I think it was last January 1st, any new building had to have a green roof in some form or fashion. And, as we're being progressive there, you can grow a ton of food on rooftops that way. And to me, when I've seen it, I like to have that arable soil, because I personally haven't seen much in the way of growing, more than just lettuce greens with like aquaponics and things like that without having these huge augmented systems. And I think that it's great, but I don't necessarily think we're going to survive on lettuce 100%. So, my feeling is, with great privilege, comes great responsibility. So our privilege is, of course, we have all these resources at our fingertips now. And how are we going to be smart with them moving forward? Obviously, water is an overarching topic that we talk about because you have to have clean water to even get to grow this food in whatever capacity. And I think it's just an important thing that we need to focus on as, urban gardeners, and humans, period.
Yeah, I mean, it's getting really interesting. And I think for me, when I look at the hydroponics, aquaponics, et cetera, worlds, which I really did come from. I mean, Epic Gardening started with a hydroponic cucumber plant in my old townhouse. I mean, that's how I did it. At the same time, I think what I see a lot is all these new hydroponic systems, whether that be for like the end consumer, like a you or a me in our homes, or a system. And I'm like, it's cool. It's basically an iteration on one of the 4 to 5 different ways you can set up a hydroponic system. Just the design looks different, or there's some extra bell or whistle. And I'm thinking, I'm certainly not against it, but at the same time, it's a drop in the bucket of what will actually make a difference as far as food production in urban areas. Like you said, I mean, there couldn't be a less calorically dense vegetable than lettuce, right? And of course, there's nutritional density as well, but like
yeah.
there's different things that we have to consider as far as producing food in urban areas, especially as the land footprint really starts to shrink. I like what you said about Denver requiring the green roof. I think it would be cool to see that be a standard instead of just having all roofs have, an HVAC unit on top and that's it.
Yeah. And I mean, again, growing on top of roofs that I've done in the past, I can see how it can be done well, and again, that's arable land. There's a place down here that is growing in a big greenhouse, and they're growing a lot of food as well, in an urban climate more year round because they have the greenhouse, because we have a shorter season here in Denver. But I think once people expand their minds around it, that there's the ability to do that. And I think that as you kind of just attested to a little bit, when I've been trying food that comes from the soil always tastes so much better to me. It has a little bit more depth of flavor, and that's something that I prefer if I have the ability to. So I guess I'm just saying, if you have the ability or you have the area to farm or garden in your specific area, either do it yourself or have someone help you do it, because it's a big resource and a privilege to have that soil that you can grow into next to you or beside you or in your backyard, and just utilizing it does greater good, in my opinion.
Yeah. I mean, I couldn't agree more. I mean, last year I did the survival challenge for a month, and
that's
really,
right. That
shifted.
Cool.
Yeah. I mean, it shifted the whole way I had to approach the garden, because I said, okay, well, I mean, if I really am living off of it, let's put it to the test. I would say 80% of my garden became potatoes. And
Wow.
then the other 20% was as much of a bean or a pea type of crop as I could. And then, of course, I had some leafy greens and stuff, so I didn't get bored. But that's the way I had to approach it. So, yeah, I mean, you do have to think about it differently. And I would say something I'm thinking about doing this year, because the apocalypse challenge was a little extreme for someone else to follow along, like actually do. So I'm thinking of doing something like homegrown Sundays, where throughout your specific growing season, everyone who follows along with Epic Gardening can just prepare one meal or 1 day's worth of meals, from their garden every week. And that type of thing I think would be a cool challenge. We hear the word farm to table all the time, or let's say you're in the home garden, you hear plot to plate or some sort of colloquialism like that. And I think it's fantastic. Obviously, we're growing local produce and we're repurposing it immediately onto our plate so we can eat it. But is there more that we can do? Are there some other things that don't involve necessarily eating what we grow, but using it in some other way? And so, Chris, just before recording this, we were talking about a couple ideas, and you had some ones that I'd never heard of before. So maybe we could start off with some of your favorites.
Yeah, you got it. I think that for me, as we talked about, I'm a beekeeper. So, having the hive, what I've called the whole hive philosophy for a while, would basically be using, you're using the pollen and the wax and whatnot to make certain things. We've been making our own deodorant here with that beeswax. It's arrowroot and essential oils, and essentially you can use that same plastic container or reusable container. and that's something that you have out in your yard. Reusable bee cloth. So you take like a pine pitch and beeswax, and you put it over linen, and that's what you can use as a reusable foil or saran wrap, if you will. And so those are coming from the hive. But as far as like using the other items, there's you can grow a certain squash, and I forget the name of it at this moment right now. But you grow the seeds for oil, and then you can press your own oil, and then therefore you have oil to cook with, make emulsifications, things like that. And so that's even almost a preservation technique. When I was in Portland, Oregon, we were blessed to have black walnut trees, and basically we were able to make ink. We were able to dye cloth from it, as well as make a Italian drink called Nocino.
Oh, I have that. I have that actually in my I have that in my pantry right now.
Yeah, you basically take black walnuts and you put them in a vodka or base spirit with some other spices, sometimes like allspice or clove or things like that, and let it sit for it's like 21, 30 days. You can make limoncellos and things like that if you're in the part of the world like you are, that you can grow those things. And I think that, you mentioned a little bit in the last episode was when you're looking at your garden more than just eating from it, how are you approaching it? How are you growing what you're growing out in your yard? And I think that, like you said, you were like, hey, all of a sudden I'm growing a lot more potatoes for that sustenance because I'm growing to live off it. That's it. I'm not going to go to the grocery store. So I think when you change your thinking that way, and right now is a perfect time when you're looking at these catalogs coming in. How are you looking through the total season? How are you looking throughout the whole year on how you can use these items differently around your house to become a little bit more zero waste and sustainable? Because you're putting all the effort into it anyways. You're going to be out there doing it. And so, making essential oils and things like that, or growing for dried herbs that you can use later on in the season that way, is kind of cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think I was mentioning to you is kind of similar thing. I met a guy who was growing for a pretty famous celebrity chef in New York, and he had a farm that sort of surrounded in a big U shape in milk cartons. I put a video up on YouTube about it. It was a pretty interesting way to grow, but he was growing indigo, and then he was dyeing the tablecloths and the napkins with the indigo. So,
nice.
When you say farm to table, you think like farm to the plate on the table, but he was actually impacting the way that the actual table looked, which I thought that was pretty cool. And then last year for myself, I mean, certainly something I'm trying to do is just actually streamline how I'm using the produce in the actual kitchen. So let's call that level 1.
Sure.
But we did do a loofah challenge on Instagram. So everyone was growing loofah around the world.
Nice.
The goal was who could grow the longest one, who could grow the biggest one. But really the whole idea was something fun, and now I've got a bunch of loofah in my house that friends have sent to me because unfortunately I completely failed at growing it. I totally messed it up. But yeah, I mean, now I use that as my shower sponge, right? And it lasts, It feels amazing. It lasts a lot longer. And I know that it was produced in a way that I agree with, So,
totally.
So many different ideas. What did I grow last year? I grew Job's Tears. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
So Job's Tears can be used as an actual grain. So it's a Chinese amaranth variety. Or no, sorry, it's not Chinese amaranth. I forgot the name of it, the actual scientific name. But basically it grows these teardrop-shaped, multicolored, glossy seeds that are pretty tough. And so people will use them as jewelry. They'll make bracelets out of them, or they'll put them in like a shaker, or you can even just, again, kind of grind them up and eat them, I believe. So,
oh, wow.
Just some interesting things.
I was going to say, even on that note, was we did grow loofah the last year, and I think I was only able to, there was 2 different varieties. I was only able to dry out a good handful of them because we didn't have a long enough growing season. So I'm with you there, Kevin, on that. So, but the ones that we did have are awesome. But I would say also too, here at the farm we have chickens, and I know that Colorado has a big fly fisherman population as well, and some of those feathers are highly prized for tying flies. So that's even something too. Not that you have to tie your own, but it could be the type of thing where not only you using chickens for whether it's meat or eggs or whatnot, or even a compost bin because they eat up your kitchen scraps, but to be able to know that you have those wonderful feathers that these fly fishermen or people that tie these fly are looking for. And I know that's esoteric, of course, but I think that, when you're looking at the spectrum of things that you can do, there's a ton of things out there.
Yeah, it's much more than you would think. And I didn't even know that fly fishing world was so deep. But my cousin has a fishing site, and he was telling me how deep that world goes and how intense the fly makers can be, and how much money they'll spend on things like that. So I could totally see that happening. So yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of ideas, guys, and I'm actually really curious. Anyone listening who has a creative way to use the stuff that they're growing in the garden for a purpose other than eating it, which of course is the main purpose, at least for me. I would love to hear it. So feel free to shoot me a message or shoot me a message on Instagram or email. I remember, Chris, a long time ago when you were on the podcast, the first round, you were mentioning some of the ways that Urban Farmer Denver was working to become more sustainable, and Boss Defrost, or at least the early seed of Boss Defrost, was briefly mentioned. And so I thought maybe we could start out with a refresher on why is so much water wasted in professional kitchens?
Sure. Well, there's a lot of water waste streams that happen there, but there's constantly certain things that you're trying to do, whether you're changing the nozzle to a sprayer or aerators in your hand washing, in your bathrooms and your hand washing sinks. And they do a little bit, but when we're talking about the sprayer, sometimes the low flow doesn't work well for the person working it, and all of a sudden that nozzle is missing and you need a new one because they'll take it off, and because it's not making their life more efficient. And so one of the major waste streams that we want to illuminate is basically the cold water running method that's used to thaw food in kitchens. And essentially there's a number of ways to thaw food, and the promising no water use way is to put it in your walk-in and let it thaw out, or your refrigerator at home. And that normally takes, depending on the size of it, 4 to 5 days. Now, whether you're ahead that much of your house or, that doesn't necessarily translate into a kitchen, and you get behind and you need to thaw something out quickly. And you do that by basically turning on the faucet in your sink, putting that food into that sink, and then turning the water on and letting it run over that piece of food or that meat, whatever it is, until it's thawed. And that can take up to a number of hours and, of course, a number of gallons. From the USDA website, it takes about roughly 125 gallons of water per pound of food to thaw in this method. And so, I mentioned earlier, in our earlier conversation, was that we were beta testing Boss Defrost at the time. I actually beta tested it for a year. And what Boss Defrost is it's an innovative new kitchen appliance that mimics this USDA running water method for thawing food, but it uses 98.5% less water. It's NSF certified, which is the National Science Foundation certification, which is about sanitation and protecting food quality. And it's also, it's portable and affordable. And the main thing is it's a now solution, not only for professional kitchens, but for residential kitchens. And so we were employing it at the restaurant. And the great part about it is, as I mentioned before, you normally have to use this sink, and the kitchens are notoriously smaller than they need to be, and that's some precious real estate. So this gives you the ability, Boss Defrost gives you the ability to kind of free your sink up and use it in a 600 hotel pan or a different container so that you can recirculate the same amount of water. And so, for instance, if I'm thawing 5 pounds of ground beef, which I did often at Urban Farmer, was essentially thawing it faster, because Boss Defrost's flow is about 1,000 liters an hour. And I'm doing it consistently over that food to thaw it faster, and using about, I would say it's about 3 to 5 gallons of water for that 5 pounds versus what I just mentioned, which is 1 pound for every 125 gallons. So I just changed. Yeah. And
that's
so
insane.
Agreed.
And it's potable water that you're wasting too, right?
Correct. It's 100% potable water. And so that's the other part, is that this is the solution for it. There is no other option that's on the table. And so that's the other part, is it hasn't been addressed. And as I'm talking to my chefs and colleagues and even people at home, they're basically like, wow, yeah, I worked in a restaurant, or I still do. And everyone has seen the water running, but that's just what is recommended and what is needed. And so this, is definitely is put into place to save all that water waste. And I saw it firsthand at Urban Farmer, like I said, for over that year, to really want to commit that I have becoming a partner of Boss Defrost and really bringing and illuminating this water waste issue in kitchens, both professional and residential, to light,
Yeah. I mean, I know that, of course, we're talking about a gardening podcast here, but I'm always interested in ways that we can reduce. And clearly, if you're cooking a lot at home too, I can see at some inflection point, a home cook is probably going to want this. You know what I mean? If you're
Correct.
preserving your own food, which we're talking about in a later episode, any sort of defrosting, especially as water rates, at least here, are rising in San Diego. I mean, we're taking our water from the Colorado River, a lot of it at least.
Yes.
And so, yeah, I mean, it kind of goes to some of the topics we've talked about in this week of episodes with you, with the dry farming and the water security and just different ways to repurpose. I love when a solution like this comes along. I'm trying to think of one in gardening that was so obvious. I mean, I guess maybe whoever invented or came up with, drip irrigation or something like that, where it's just not dumping water directly on top of your soil and then immediately evaporating off 67% of it or whatever the percentage is. So
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really cool. So what's next on the menu for Boss Defrost?
Basically, like I was saying, we're going to go on a road trip this summer and basically, go to all these water-stricken areas. A meeting with culinary schools. We're talking to companies like Kroger and Hilton International, and going. When you start to think about all the commercial kitchens that are out there, hospitals, schools, it gets very, very big. And all these kitchens are doing this thawing method. And so that's what's next, is really casting that net of letting people know that we are out there. We have a solution to this water waste problem, and that we can really, really save tons of water. And that's also what's next, is us quantifying it through a lot of third parties here. But we are for sale now. We started sales this year. Reach out if you're interested. I'd love to hear from you.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks for sharing that. And of course, good luck with the launch of it all. It looks really cool. And I would love to, whenever you do the road trip, definitely stop by San Diego.
We will definitely come and see you.
Chris is now the partner and CSO, the Chief Sales Officer of Boss Defrost, which we heard about in yesterday's show. And I thought what we would do today, Chris, is talk about some food preservation techniques from someone who has deep experience in the kitchen as well as experience as an urban farmer. So it's a really great 1-2 punch. We've had people on who are homesteaders, home gardeners, and I thought it'd be cool to come at it from the angle that you provide.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. I think, we kind of touched on it a little bit as well, was, just planning your garden for the year to come. I know that sometimes you feel like you do and you're like, I'm going to do this. And I know, at least for me, I'm thinking about what I'm eating in the season and freshness, carrots, things like that, and how I'm going to cook it. And I'm not necessarily thinking about the shoulder season of what am I going to do if it's so prolific, right? And so that's the part where sometimes it becomes more prolific than I thought it was going to be, and now I have all this extra. So what am I doing with it? I talked about when we had so much cantaloupe, and what we did there is because, again, it was all ripening at the same time, and because the succession plan that I planted with, again, it was still prolific. Again, it's a good problem to have, I agree. But it was basically saying, hey, I have all this, I need to use it up. And so what we did in that case was we made sorbets. We had salads right away that we were eating with it, fruit salads. We were making cocktails with it. And so we looked at every other way we could. This year, for Lost Creek Microfarm, we did what we talked about before, which was like growing all these esoteric ingredients. I really wanted to grow these interesting ingredients, which was this year for me, it was oyster leaf. I think you and I talked about this before.
Yeah.
Salad Burnett, lovage. I'm trying to think about what the other one was. And those were the three main ones that I wanted to grow when I was doing the James Beard dinner last year. And again, they were very prolific. And so toward the end of the season, we had, and this is also another thing, was that we had an early snow coming on, and I knew that this was going to happen. So I had to pick all my peppers early. and I wasn't planning on that. I had to pick all my oyster leaf, all my lovage, and all my salad burnet because it was just going to die anyway. So my wife and I jumped out in the field and we just gathered all these things. So I wound up making hot sauce from these peppers. And the interesting part was I left this hot sauce green because the peppers themselves were green. And so I wanted that to speak to the fact that it was an early season this year and that we could tell not only our guests that, but also whoever I was sharing it with that, hey, it was, it's kind of like wine that we were talking about. What happened that season, what happened that year, shows up in what you get produced. And so I really wanted to tell that story. And so that's what we did. I made this hot sauce. I salted it. I fermented it for 30 days. I took some of that out. I took I took about a gallon of it because I made about 5 gallons of it. Took a gallon of it and put it in a wood barrel and fermented it for another 30 days. And then I washed that barrel with a tequila or a vodka to have a spicy tequila or vodka for cocktails as well. So it kind of spanned and had 3 or 4 different lives within the same recipe, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, that sounds very intense and it sounds very professional.
Yeah.
But I like it. I like the ability to reuse something multiple times.
And I think the other thing that we did, we get grain from one of our local brewers out here called Next Stop Brewing, and we feed it to our chickens. And so I went to Andrew, and I he's the head brewer there, and I had oyster leaf, lovage and salad burnet, and I brought it to him and I said, hey, look, I understand. I want you to try these things. I hope you can do something with them because otherwise I don't have a way of preserving them, or I have a lot of it. So what can we do with it? Can we brew with it? And he likes to make a lot of food pairing brews. And so together, he wound up working his magic because I didn't have anything to do with the brewing process. But we made an oyster leaf and matsutake mushroom beer, a lovage and apple beer, and then a salad burnet, which is kind of cucumbery, and a dill beer. So we made 3 different beers, again, preserving these herbs in this beer format. And I know I'm not a home brewer. I have a lot of friends that are home brewers. So if you think about that application in terms of, your garden as well, infusing these herbs and or peppers or things like that into your beers or cocktails or whatnot is also an awesome way to kind of extend that season and preserve them for coming along. So those are my 2 favorite things to do. I mean, and also I wind up freezing a lot because I'll make tomato sauces because I love growing tomatoes. And then of course, putting them in food saver bags and going from there, just because to me sometimes canning feels a little bit laborious and going through the whole process. And so when you're freezing berries for smoothies or pureeing your pureeing for seed oil or whatnot, there's just a multitude of ways to look at it, going back to planning your garden out for the longevity of the year.
Yeah. I mean, I totally agree, and I know that, again, calling back to the Apocalypse Challenge, there were some things that as I was foraging, mulberries almost don't keep at all. And so, if I got a big harvest of those, I had to throw them in my dehydrator, which I really wanted to go really crazy and buy an insane one, but I ended up buying, like a mid-range Nesco dehydrator, and I was doing that with my loquats as well. And so I think the first thing you said was really smart. So planning out your garden so you actually don't have too much of things at the end of the season.
Yes.
Because, I know so many people, and this has happened to me as well, where you grow, and you're stoked, and then you're sitting there canning or preserving or giving away or whatever at the end, and you're like, you know what, I maybe didn't actually need to grow that much. And
Yes.
so that's step 1, I guess. But then once you get towards the fact that you do have things that you want to preserve. Another thing I've been doing is mixing it into just kombucha, just doing simple kombucha, because for me, I've done some home brewing, but I don't even like beer that much, and I love kombucha. And so, just throwing some extra loquats or
that's a great idea.
Herbs or whatever into kombuchas works as well. So would love to know if anyone out there listening has their own food preservation techniques that they'd like to share. Feel free to shoot me a DM on Instagram or get in touch with me however you see fit. Today, we are going to be talking about some creative ways to use your garden produce. I mean, I know that I've definitely gotten burnt out sometimes by growing salad, growing peas, growing beans, and maybe I don't have enough to work them into a certain recipe, or I don't have the mental capacity to create complex dishes. So I think, Chris, if you could enlighten us, I think that would be amazing.
Sure. Well, I mean, I don't think they always have to be complex. I think that, some of the notes I wrote down here, I mean, the best example I have of definitely eating seasonally, obviously, right? When I love growing tomatoes, and my wife literally eats bruschetta every single day while it's in, and that's the easiest preparation you could ever have, because I think most of the time, you're talking about things that are in peak season like that. They're just the best right there. They're warm from the sun out in the garden, and they're just the best. I would say challenging yourself to try something new. I think one of the things that I did a while ago, which was making a pizza dough, can be very easy, right? So and so when you make that dough, and if you have a stone for your oven, the best thing to do, because most of the time you have a great pizza, is because of the heat of the oven. Anytime you go to those the pizza places, they have 800 to 1,000 degree pizzas when they're making Napoli style. The way to achieve that is actually on your grill. So we would crank up your grill, throw your stone on there, and then par cook your dough on there, and then put all your ingredients on there from your garden, and just finish it. And then you'll get a restaurant style pizza out of it that way. There's a little bit of char in there. You have that little bitterness is coming out, and it's one of the best things that you'll probably have growing just from whatever produce you have. You can garnish that with some arugula, just some fresh arugula, because sometimes I personally don't like just arugula in a salad or mixed greens. You have a ton of greens in the season, and garnishing the top of that pizza is a great way to do it. I think another fun one, you were talking about, Kevin, which just might have been something you did, making gnocchi, which is like a potato dumpling from the potatoes that you are growing. Now, generally you're using an Idaho potato because you have that starch level, and all you need is a little bit of flour. If you have chickens, you can use your eggs, and a little bit of salt, and it's pretty simple from there. I guarantee you can go on YouTube and look at a lot of chefs that make it. It's a really simple way to kind of make potatoes in a different way instead of just making mashed potatoes or roasted potatoes. And then once you go through the process, because it is a dough, you can either cook them off right away, or you can freeze them, and bring them out as you see fit, kind of like you would with any other pasta style thing that you're gonna make from your kitchen. And I think one of the third ones is, talking to your neighbors and looking around who else is growing, because as we were talking about, sometimes you can get really great at growing something and you're very good and prolific at it. Like I said, my neighbor across the way is great at hot chilies. And so we kind of talk in the season, like, hey, how are things going? And then kind of swapping from there to cook different items in your kitchen or cooking together. It kind of helps grow that community. And that's, to me, one of my favorite things about cooking, whether it's professionally or at home, is inviting that community to try everything that you're making. And most of the time, they're the best critics. You know what I mean? Like anybody who you get to cook with or you're cooking for, especially from your garden, is and should be absolutely appreciative that you're trying something new, and will most of the time jump in and help you.
Yeah. I think it's actually cool that you mentioned that last piece, because as I wrote down some goals, just life goals for myself for 2020, just things I want to happen, I was kind of thinking of like the three big categories. You've got like your health, you have your career life, and then you have sort of your relationship life. And, last year was a huge focus for me on the career life side of things. So like building up Epic Gardening and really going as hard as I can on that. This year I was like, you know what? I had a good year and I want to refocus on some health things. And that would be, of course, like just mental, physical, everything. And one of the most obvious ways to me to do that would be to cook even more from the garden.
Yeah.
Like flex my creativity, but then tying in that relational aspect and bringing more people in. Because now that I've got a space, we've done the backyard's been remodeled, looks amazing.
Nice.
Having a space to like really go hard on the creativity of cooking from the kitchen instead of just, you mentioned the gnocchi. I did not have the capacity during that challenge. I was like, I need potato wedges in my mouth immediately because I have no energy. And so, doing stuff like that, I think is just such an amazing way to go full circle. And we talk about that all the time, like 360 degree sustainability, or what have you, just closing the loop to the degree that you can, and also kind of infecting other people with the bug, if not of gardening, but of enjoying like homegrown produce. And that's what changes people, not telling them they should do something. It's they have to experience it and then convince themselves.
Agreed. And the one thing I will say about everybody listening, if you're gardening, you're farming, you are not a lazy person. Not at all. Guaranteed if you're doing it at all. And so therefore, trying a new recipe is the easiest thing you can probably challenge yourself with, because being in the garden, dealing with like aphids or any of that other stuff is much harder. So just think about it that in terms of that, is that, trying a new recipe can be daunting, but it doesn't have to be, it doesn't need to be this complex recipe. And it's certainly easier than being in the garden most of the times too, depending on how your year's going.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. I, for some reason, it's so obvious. I've never thought about it that way. Like the easiest thing to do is to go to Whole Foods or whatever farmer's market and buy the arugula instead of suffering through the struggle of growing it. So yeah, if you're a gardener, and you should be, if you're listening to this podcast, then certainly what Chris said is definitely true. Dude, it's been amazing to have you on the podcast again. I would love to have you back sometime. But at this point in time, I would love to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about how people can reach you, how they connect with Boss Defrost, and kind of what else is going on in your world.
Sure. So, Boss Defrost is Boss Defrost. So that's BOSSDEFROST.com. We have a lot of information there. We're working on a lot of content for residential and professional kitchens. I'm in a lot of those videos to show how it can be used, because at this point in time, I know how to use it very well because we were able to use it for over a year. And then on social media is myself is at Chris Starkus. That's ChrisStarkus. And then, of course, at Boss Defrost, BOSSDEFROST. And like I said, we're going to be going on the road in summer, my wife, my family, and I, and that's just kind of a goal of visiting some national parks, really spending a lot of time with my family and visiting some of the water-stricken areas of the United States, and talking a little bit more about Boss Defrost sustainability, 360-degree sustainability. So reach out to me if we're going to be posting about where we're going to go. And I'd love to meet some of Kevin's listeners and kind of move from there. So thanks a lot, Kevin. I appreciate you having me on again.
Yeah, of course. Anytime. And good luck with everything. And thanks so much for coming on.
Absolutely. Cheers, brother.
Cheers.